Alright, today we're going to talk about Russia, which we have formerly known as Kievan Rus, but it's going to start to be called Russia now. And Russia is going to start over in Eastern Europe, okay, but it's going to expand all the way across Northern Asia during this time period. Now, Russia in the post-classical period was under the control of the Mongols. The Mongols had taken them over. And this really forms a distinct Russian culture. They have a lot of Asian influences because they were under the control of the Mongols, and it kept them from really experiencing all the developments that the West was. So they sort of have this unique culture. They're not quite Asian because they're Eastern Orthodox, but they're not quite European because they didn't experience a lot of the things that Western Europeans were experiencing. But they are, after the fall of the Byzantine Empire, the Byzantines are conquered by the Ottomans. After they fall, Russia is really the center of Eastern Orthodox or Orthodox Christianity. And so they are sort of keeping this sect of Christianity alive. So Russia is also going to keep feudalism too. They're feudalistic in nature. The nobles are called boyars here. So the Mongols are in control of Kievan Rus, which is also be called Russia. But the Russians are actually going to kick the Mongols out, and they're going to have rulers that are called czars. Now, a czar is basically the word for Caesar, okay? They believed that they were sort of the next Rome, okay? They were following in the glory of Rome, so they called their emperor Caesar, or czar. And the first one was Ivan III. Now, he's the one that actually kicks the Mongols out in 1480. His son, Ivan IV, is nicknamed Ivan the Terrible for killing so many people. He's the next czar. And he was really known for doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Here you can see, here's Ivan the III, here's Ivan the IV. And here you can see Ivan IV, Ivan the Terrible, has impaled all these people, shoved the stick straight up through these people and hung them there on display. He really liked taking hats and putting them on their head and then taking a nail and a hammer and hammering the nail straight into the person's head. So that's just some of the reasons he got nicknamed Ivan the Terrible. But he also did some good things for Russia itself. He expanded the empire into Northern Asia, not all the way across, but into Northern Asia. And the way that he did this was that he basically hired peasants called Cossacks, these peasant warriors. And he basically said, you can have freedom and land if you go and conquer this territory in the name of Russia. So these Cossacks went out, these peasant warriors went out, and they started to take territory. Now, most of this territory was uninhabited or sparsely inhabited because it was Northern Asia and it was so cold. But there were people up there. They did have to conquer the land. And these Cossacks gained their freedom and land, gaining a little bit more power for themselves and for Russia itself. Now, eventually, after Ivan IV, there was no determined successor. They didn't know who was going to take over after him. So it enters this time of trouble where the boyars are all fighting each other for control over Russia. But eventually they get tired of fighting and they decide that this fight isn't very good. So they came together to elect a new czar. And they elected Michael Romanov to be the next czar after the time of troubles. Now, Michael Romanov, he continues expanding Russia across Northern Asia. And he goes all the way from Eastern Europe all the way to the Pacific Ocean, to the all the way across Northern Asia. But he changes things. Ivan IV had promised these Cossacks freedom, all these peasants, if they expand the empire. But Michael Romanov actually took away their freedom. He forces the peasants into coerced labor. Now, coerced labor is not slavery because they're not really considered to be owned. They're not property. But he is forcing them to work for Russia to grow food and do other building projects and such like that. So he sort of forces them to do work for the state. Now, eventually, there are other czars which become very important, Peter the Great and Catherine the Great. Now, they are both important because they start a process called Westernization in Russia. And Westernization is trying to be like Western Europe. Western Europe was experiencing all these advancements. They were becoming much more powerful, and Russia wants a piece of that. So they try to become like Europe. Now, Peter the Great starts Westernization. Here's Peter, he built the city of St. Petersburg in the furthest west portion of Russia to try to increase trade. And he was thinking that if trade increases, cultural diffusion is going to increase, and Russia will become more like Western Europe. Catherine the Great is going to continue this. But Westernization as a whole isn't really successful. It's only influential in the upper classes of Russia. And it's not really focused on the intellectual and artistic developments that it was in Russia. It was solely based on building power rather than actually developing intellectually and becoming more advanced. So it didn't really have the effect that Peter and Catherine would have wanted, but they tried to sort of advance Russia in that way. And then that is it for Russia during this time.